So one of the most requested builds that I've gotten over time has been for a wishing well. To be honest, I've held off because the first thing that pops into my head whenever someone says wishing well is this 80s style version built out of landscaping timbers. Personally, I'm not a big fan. But then it hit me. What is it that I teach on this channel? It is taking a general idea, putting our own twist to it with our own creativity, and coming up with something completely new. And this is how it turned out. In this video, I'll be teaching you step by step on how to build this 4-foot tall stylish wishing well. This thing will make an awesome planter, lawn decor, or even non-traditional ideas like a place to receive your packages or for cards and gifts for a wedding. So as you can see, its uses are only limited by what you can dream up. So to start off with this project, we're going to be building the base of this thing. And the material that I'm going to be using for this, you guessed it, fence pickets. Again, it's going to be completely up to you on what you decide to use. If you're planning on painting this thing, I would kind of stick with the fence pickets because you can pick them up for a couple bucks a piece still. But like any other project, feel free to use any material that you'd like. So I'm going to start off by ripping down the material that I'm going to be using for my 6 side panels. So I'm going to take a few pickets and rip those down to 5 1/4 of an inch wide, and then I'll rip down a couple more at 2 1/2 inches. Once we get those cut to width, let's go ahead and cut these pieces down to size. So we'll be needing 12 boards that are 5 1/4 inch wide, and then 6 boards that are 2 1/2 inches wide. And for our 2 1/2 inch material, I'm going to be cutting 6 boards that are 10 inches long. And for the height of this base, I'm going to make mine 16 inches high. And as always, I'm about to teach you step by step on how to build this super cool wishing well. But if you're a plans in the hand type of person, head over to my website for a super detailed set of plans and cut lists. Okay, so now that we have our panel boards cut, let's go ahead and cut our panel trim. That way, whenever we go to assemble all of these, we don't have to run back and forth to the table saw and the miter saw. So the panel trim is actually going to be a top and bottom rail and the 2 sides. For this, I'm going to be using 1 1/2 inch material. Once I get a couple of pickets ripped down to 1 1/2 inch strips, I'll head over to the miter saw and we'll cut 12 boards that are 10 inches long. These will be our top and bottom boards, and 12 boards that are 16 inches long. These are going to be our side boards. So now with all the parts that we need for our panels cut, if you're planning on painting or staining the trim a different color than the panel boards themselves, I'll go ahead and do that now just to save you a little bit of headache of trying to paint this stuff once it's installed. For this build, I decided to go with a white trim with a whitewashed look. Then I'll be leaving the panels themselves natural. There's just something about the white trim against the cedar that gives it a super clean finish. Another idea for this that I may end up doing is painting the trim black. The black against the cedar would also give it a super clean look. I'm just using a white exterior paint. You could also do this with spray paint if you're not looking for the whitewashed look. I actually want the brush marks to still show on my wood. Now while I'm waiting for my trim to dry, I'm going to go ahead and start assembling my panels. Okay, so for our panels, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be needing 2 of the 5 1/4 inch boards and 1 of the 2 1/2 inch boards. And then they'll go together something like this. And the 2 1/2 inch board will be in the center. But before we can put these things together, let's go ahead and cut some pocket holes in our 2 1/2 inch boards. And to assemble each one of our 6 panels, I'm going to put 3 pocket holes on each side of our center boards. So I'll mark my screw placement at 2, 8, and 14 inches on each one of my center boards, and then get those pocket holes cut. And since my material is a 1/2 of an inch thick, I'll set my pocket hole bit to 1/2 of an inch and make my cuts. Okay, so now with our pocket holes cut, let's go ahead and start assembling these panels. And for each one of these panels, we're going to be needing 2 of our 5 1/4 inch boards and just 1 of our center boards. And I know you may be thinking, why are we assembling this now if we have not put any angles on this, since it's essentially a hexagon? I figured out during my prototyping that it's going to be a lot easier to put our angles on these panels after we get them assembled. And to assemble these, I'm going to be using some wood glue and some 1-inch pocket hole screws. And just to make sure that our panel parts are all squared, I'll be using a large square as a guide. And if you're not planning on painting these panels, make sure to put the side that you would like exposed facing down. And then we'll just repeat this step for the rest of our panels. Okay, so I brought all my trim pieces over. I'm ready to put these panels together, and I just figured out my paint is not dry. So there's only one thing that we can really do about this. Let's watch paint dry. This is pretty boring. All right, so now that our paint is dry, let's go ahead and finish up these panels. And adding the trim to these side panels, that's going to be a piece of pie. Again, as long as it's not pumpkin. But I'm going to be using wood glue and brad nails for this. Just go easy on the brad nails and let the wood glue do its thing. This will save you a little bit of time later on touching up. But as you can see here, that's all that I'm doing is putting two of the side boards on the side and the top and bottom boards, well, on the top and bottom. The main thing to make sure of is that they're flush with each edge and that your panel screws are facing down. So with our panels all glued up and dried, it's time to put the angles on these so that they'll all match up and make a nice hexagon. And since a hexagon is made up of a series of 30-degree miters or bevels, that's exactly what we're going to be doing on the table saw. Or if you prefer, you can actually make this exact same cut using a circular saw. But almost all table saws are wide enough to handle this cut. So we'll just set our table saw blade to a 30-degree angle and then our fence at 12.5 inches wide. Now we're only going to be making this cut on the sides of these panels. So with the trim facing up, I'll make a 30-degree rip on one side and then just turn the panel around and repeat for the opposite side. So now that we have our panels all angled up, let's go ahead and put these things together. So to actually join these panels together, we're going to be using pocket hole screws in kind of a non-traditional way. So really for this hexagon shape, we only have a couple of different options. Most of the time people will drill holes to the outside or just put in nails to the outside. And you can do that. But if you'd like your screws hidden, let's put in some pocket hole screws. So for this, we're going to be changing the setting on our drill bit to 1 inch. And if your drill bit doesn't have a 1 inch setting, just set it so that the bottom of your collar is barely touching the 3/4 inch mark. Then we'll be using the 3 pocket holes that we put in earlier as a reference to putting 3 more on one side of each panel. Let's go ahead and get that knocked out. And that's all that I'm doing is putting the trim side against the back of the pocket hole jig and then making my cuts. All right, so now that we have our pocket holes cut in one side of each one of these panels, let's go and put all these together. And anytime that you're trying to join two boards at a 30-degree angle, it can be kind of challenging holding things into place. So I'll be putting wood glue on each one of my edges. Then I'll get everything lined up just the way that I want it. And to just help hold this into place, I'm going to use a clamp. I'm going to put it right in the center of the outside and put a little bit of pressure on this trim. Just going to squeeze these two boards together, keeping my angle just perfect. It's going to allow me to install my screws from the back. Now for this, make sure to use the same 1 inch pocket hole screws that we used earlier. If you use anything that's any longer, it may come out the other side. We'll just take our clamp off and keep working our way around. All right, so now that we have our base made, nice little hexagon. That reminds me of that Price is Right wheel. You know, where they spin it and big money, big money, big money. I don't even know if the show's still on. Now we can move on to putting on our top trim and then our side and roof assembly. Now right now this does not have a bottom in it, and I'm probably not going to put one in it. The main reason is because most likely this will either be filled with potting soil or potted plants. For some reason, if you want a bottom in this, all that you would have to do is add in some slats. Completely up to you. For this top trim, I'm going to be using an 1.5 inch material. And as you can see, I've already painted this white. So the only thing left to do for these is to add some 30-degree miters and get these installed. You do not have to have a fortune in tools or a giant workshop to get started in woodworking. I started off in my front yard, and getting started does not have to be expensive. You can actually pick up all the tools that you need to start building today for less than the cost of this thing. And I've put together a detailed list of those tools and where to find them for the best price. So if you'd like this free guide to essential and affordable woodworking tools, just scan this QR code in the corner, or you can head over to mytoolguide.com. So no more excuses, no more procrastinating. The maker community is awesome, and we can't wait for you to join us. So for our top trim, you're going to be needing 6 boards that are 13 3/4 inch long by 1.5 inches wide. And then we'll be installing these to match our panels underneath. And for that, I'm going to be using wood glue, a couple of brad nails just to hold these into place. And then I'll be installing some 1 inch screws. We'll be needing 6 of these that are 13 3/4 inch long. Again, I'm using an 1.5 inch material, and then you'll need a 30-degree angle on each end. Just a tip when installing these, when you're cutting your material for these parts, cut it a little bit long so you can custom fit each piece. I like to cut my first board to fit, then just cut one end of the next board, and then mark out my second cut. Then for our screw placement on each of our sides, I'll measure out 1 inch, 6 inch, and 11 inches. And then I'll measure up 3/8 of an inch for each one of these. And then we'll pre-drill and countersink before installing our 1 inch screws. I like to use these light goldish color exterior screws. They just seem to match the cedar pretty well. But if you do not like these screws showing on top, you can always add a little bit of wood filler and use some touch-up paint. All right, so starting to look really cool. Top trim is on. Now let's go ahead and make our roof. And to do this, we're going to be creating 2 different panels to make our, kind of the V shape. For each one of these roof panels, you'll be needing 4 boards that are 5 1/4 inches wide by 12 inches long. and one board that is 2.5 inches wide by 12 inches long. And then for the roof trim for each panel, you're going to be needing two boards that are 23.5 inches long by 1.5 inches wide, and two boards that are 9 inches long by 1.5 inches wide. Since we have all of our parts cut and ready, let's go ahead and put the roof panels together. And to put these panels together, again, I'm going to be using a large T-square. Then I'm just going to lay all of my roof slats out. Next, I'm going to put some wood glue on the sides of my roof slats, and then lay those all out against my square. Then I'm going to throw on some wood glue for my trim. I'm going to start with a 23.5 inch piece. And since this is going to be the top, I'm just going to put a brad nail on each corner. This will just be to hold the trim in place. Once our trim is locked down, we can flip this over and really fasten this down with brad nails from the back. This will just help to hide all of your fasteners. Since my material is 1/2 inch thick, I'm using 7/8 inch brad nails. And now we have a roof panel. And then we'll just repeat this for our second panel and then join the two. And then to join these two sides together, we'll take them over to the table saw. We'll set it to 45 degrees. And then we'll rip one edge of both panels. Since my panel is 1 inch thick, I'll be setting my fence to 11 inches wide. And I just realized that I messed up with the brad nails. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so what I should have done whenever I was putting the brad nails in, you notice how close to the edge that I put these? I have 1.5 inches to work with here. I'm not sure why I put them all so close to the very edge. Whenever you're putting your brad nails in, drop it down about 1 inch and then put your brad nails in the back. If not, it's going to look like this. And even worse than looking like this is this poor saw blade. So don't be like me and do that. But it is what it is. Let's go ahead and put these two sides together. So now that both of our panels have a 45-degree edge, I'm going to go ahead and mark my screw placement on one of my panels. I'm going to put a mark at 2 inches from each end, then one at 11 5/8. And from the outside edge, that mark needs to be at 5/8 inch in. Once our panel is marked for screw placement, let's glue these up and screw them together. And this will be another time where a squeeze clamp will come in super handy. I'm just going to pre-drill straight in at each one of my marks and then add a 1 inch exterior screw. All right, so now that we have our top made and our base made, can you visualize it? Picture it here. It's going to look pretty awesome. Now we just need to make our top supports. And for that, we're going to be using some 1.5 inch by 1 inch material. I just cut a couple of 1 inch strips out of a 2x4. For my main supports, I'll be needing two boards that are 46 inches long. And after my support is cut to length, I'm going to mark the center of my board, or 3/4 inch, set my saw to 45 degrees and make two cuts meeting in the middle. Now that we have our two ends cut, let's go ahead and mark and pre-drill our screw placement for the bottom. This will be where the main supports attach to our base. And for this, we'll be pre-drilling 1 inch up and 15 inches up. And I'll use that as a reference whenever I'm measuring 3/4 inch in to center. And then on the same side of our supports, I'm going to measure up 35.5 inches from the bottom and make a mark. Again, from that mark, we'll measure 3/4 inch in. But this time, instead of pre-drilling, we're going to be cutting a 3/4 inch hole for our dowel rod that holds our bucket. And for this, you can use a Forstner bit or a 3/4 inch spade bit. For the board on our left, we're only going to drill about 1/2 inch in. Then the board on the right will be drilled all the way through. And now it's time to attach our two supports to our base. And we'll be attaching these to the centers of two opposite walls. So I'm going to measure over 5 1/4 inch from the inside of one of my corners. Then I'll throw in a clamp and make sure that I'm good and square. Once we have it square, I'm going to put in an 1 3/4 screw in both of my pre-drilled screw holes, starting at the bottom. Now I'll cut the 4 Y braces using the same materials we did for our main support. Each one of these braces needs to be 7 inches long and have a 45-degree angle on one end. Now that our braces are cut, I'm going to measure 1 inch up from the end with the 45-degree angle. And then from those marks, I'm going to pre-drill and counterbore. And you can do this step once these are in place. It just makes it a little easier doing it ahead of time. Now to install our side bracket, we're going to measure up 35 1/8, make a mark on the side, and do the exact same for the opposite side. Then we'll take one of our brackets and just set it right on top of our mark. So with that on top of our mark, I'm going to finish this pre-drill into our main board and then install an 1 3/4 screw. And there's really not going to be much weight on these at all, and really the top doesn't weigh much to begin with, so one screw in each side would be plenty. Now we'll just repeat this for the other 3. All right, so now that we have all 4 of our supports attached, let's see how our roof is going to fit. That's going to look awesome. let's get this attached. Okay, so I went ahead and put this on the ground just so I can, get to the top a little bit easier. The next thing that we're going to need to do is to attach our roof assembly to our braces. We'll start by squaring this up on each side. 1 3/8 of overhang should be just right. Now I'm going to mark the top of my roof for screw placement into my brackets. I'm going to measure down 8 1/4 and over from the outside edge 1 7/8. I'm going to do this for all 4 sides, pre-drill, counterbore, and install my 1-inch screws. Now you can use wood glue for this if you'd like. I'm going to leave mine as is, just in case I want to take the top off to store it away. So now we just need to install our dowel rod in our little handle, and we're almost done. So the dowel rod that I'm going to be using is 3/4 of an inch around and 22.5 inches long. We'll just put it through the right side and seat it right into this left side, which is not drilled all the way through. So from this point, you can either glue this in if you would like, or if you actually want this thing to be able to turn, we will pre-drill a hole through the inside here, and then we'll just install a small screw to keep this from backing out. And whenever you install your screw, just make sure that it doesn't go all the way through the dowel. And then to make our little handle, I'm going to start off with 2 pieces of 1.5 inch material that are 6 inches long. And I'm just going to double these up. I'm going to put a little wood glue in, and then a couple of brad nails towards the center. This is just going to be to hold this into place until the wood glue dries. The reason why we put our nails in the center is because we're going to be drilling a couple of holes in the ends of this. This is going to be for the handle. So on one end, I'm going to start by measuring 3/4 of an inch down and 3/4 of an inch in. Then I'll flip the board over and do the exact same thing for the opposite end. Then using the same bit as we did earlier, we're going to drill halfway through our material. So in this case, only 1/2 inch. This time we're making sure to keep our bit nice and steady so we have a nice tight fit. Now to shape our ends, I'm just going to take something round and trace it out. I have this little magnet handy, but really you can use about anything that you would like. I'm just going to trim this up using a jigsaw. If you have a belt sander, that would also do the trick. And while I have this clamped down to use the jigsaw, I'm going to go ahead and pre-drill a hole for a screw in the very center of my 3/4 of an inch cutout. Then we'll just repeat this for the opposite side. Then I'll just hit this with the sander, and we're ready to install. Since we already have both sides pre-drilled, let's go ahead and countersink each side. Now with that done, we can install our handle. And for that, that's all that we'll need is a 3-inch piece of dowel that's 3/4 of an inch around. Then we'll just lay it on its side and install a screw from the back. And we have a handle. Now to install our handle to our well, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to put some wood glue in the bottom here, slide it in place, and then throw in a screw. And just like that, we have a super cool little wishing well. Now from this point, it's completely up to you on what you would like to do. You could actually add a little rope here or a little bucket hanging down, or you could just leave it like it is and actually hang some plants from this rod. It's going to end up really awesome regardless. So there is a rule for whenever you make a wishing well. You get the first wish. Okay, so I have 4 kids, so obviously there's not any money in my pockets. How about a screw? Let's just hope that this wishing well grants wishes for screws. So if you like this little wooden pail that I've made, that's all that I did was take a cheap metal bucket that I got off of Amazon and took some of these thin edges from 2x4s, cut these down to fit, and glued them all in place with CA glue. And honestly, I think it was a pretty nice addition. So once again, we have created something beautiful from common material. And again, proving one of my mottos that if you can dream it, we can build it. So until next time, stay positive, believe in yourself, and get your make on.